engagement starts with relationships. And how do we facilitate and foster relationships in the modern church going forward?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Intentional Churches podcast. My name is Erin Johnston, and I am here with Doug Parks. How are you, Doug?
Doing great. Hi, Erin.
Good to be with you. We've been already in the first couple episodes just exploring some different realities of church leadership today, really what it means to, we've talked about multiply and kind of help equip our people and encourage them to be mobilized beyond the church walls to go and do something with their faith. And today we're going to kind of shift the conversation a little bit with all of that in mind and talk about driving engagement in today's church. But before we do that, I just want to encourage us to keep this, everything we've talked about. And if you haven't listened to the first two episodes, I'd really encourage you to go do that. To keep that in mind as we have this conversation, that this conversation is not about just becoming institutionally focused, but it's really about how do we help people be engaged in today's church in a way that really matters, in a way that helps them be effective disciple makers beyond the walls of the church. And so, Doug, I'd love to just jump into this conversation with you, and let's just start by, what do we even mean by engagement in today's church? When you and Intentional Churches thinks about this idea of someone being engaged in the church, what do you think of?
Yeah, Aaron, I think about engagement is about how do we get people more relationally connected and into the activities and environments of the church that shape them personally. So most of the time we think about it, as we've discussed on previous episodes, institutionally about engagement, like how many people can we get to an event, a class or whatever. But we're really fighting for how do we get people not just engaged with your institutional church, but during the week doing the behaviors of investing in relationally people who are far from God, as well as other believers that you may be encouraging or praying for, and that you're always seeing your church life as part of your personal mission in life as you follow Jesus. And so we can look at engagement like we have traditionally, where it's about how do I get them to growth track and through all the things of growth track so I can get them volunteering and in a group and giving. I always joke, it's attend one, serve one, give one, group one, invite one. Like we all have the same mentalities, more institutionally minded. And I think the challenge in today's church is how do we flip the way we're leading our people? So we think about engagement as how do I get people engaged in the mission of Jesus in the regular week and stop thinking about it as an event or a thing I come to or do.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard you say before that it's not just about what we want for our people or what we want from our people. It's what we want with our people, right?
That's right.
And so we really we have to think about engagement and engaging people as being with them. And that doesn't just happen in 1 hour on Sunday. We really have to kind of take away this institutional view and really help people engage in the life of the church far beyond the church walls. So I'm wondering, Doug, if you right now were speaking to our listeners, who many of which are church leaders, how does our mindset have to change as church leaders when we start thinking about this idea of engaging people?
Well, especially early on, when you're reaching ones, simply the definition is from Luke 15, those who do not know Jesus yet. When you're reaching ones and you have a one-aware church, a one-aware mindset, you as a Christ follower, a 99er are one-aware and activated, then you have to think about the engagement on the front end being primarily relational. And we have this rule of thumb that I know came from some great church thinkers before, I just can't remember who, that in the beginning of a believer's journey, or as they're on this journey to Christ, can we get at least 7 relational connects? Too much of current engagement in a church is thought about transactionally. How does the institution collect your information so the institution can then follow up with you during the week to try to get you to our simple step, first step class? And it's a very institutional move as opposed to how do we create environments where we get as many relational connects as possible for the believer and the unbeliever? Because the relational side, the human side, is why people will engage. It's not because you had a great program or idea or a new thing you were doing. People will engage for that for a moment, but it's still transactional thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we hear the Surgeon General released a report earlier this year that the epidemic in America is this idea of loneliness. And there's like this 87-page report talking about how lonely we are as a people. And so this conversation of relational engagement, not just connection to a program or connection to an event, but connection to real people so that they can be with them, is really where we need to be focusing. I wonder, what have you, like things that you have done or things that you encourage others to do to kind of convert to this mindset of relational engagement, being with each other, not just for church leaders, but for the congregants, for the people that are going to encounter this? Like, what have you done or what do you encourage other people to do in that conversation?
Well, this is an old school thought, but I'm here more than ever. And I'm even thinking about for our Church OS conference, trying to figure out how to do this. And that is trying to never put people in rows in an event, that we're always in a round. So, promoting ways, whether it's your first step class or whatever, that we're actually putting people in a position where they're going to learn each other's stories some and have relational equity among them. So like one of my favorite things right now is saying, if your first step class, whatever that is, starting point or growth track, whatever it may be, 101 from Discovery 101 from Saddleback, whatever it is, it should be like 20 to 25% content and like 60+% table talk and conversation, promoting this relational side. And then maybe like 5 or 10% is this idea of creating a tool or a challenge they can take with them during the week. And that will up your engagement in spades in a very quick way. If you're doing those kinds of things, if you put people in rows and you download a whole bunch of content in that first step class about the church and our governance and all these things, you're immediately stepping outside of what I believe is kind of Jesus' mandate. Like, we're supposed to be doing the one another's, and how do we get people doing that as quickly as possible? I know you guys, Canyon Ridge has been doing a cool thing in the auditorium, right? Like, join a section. You want it for a minute before we get to talk about join a section and how you are fighting for those. When you talk about engagement, you're fighting for relational connect, even in the auditorium or sanctuary.
Yeah, we encourage everybody who comes to kind of our first time guest class. We call it Discover Canyon Ridge. We say one of the next most simple steps you could take to find your people, and that's the language we always use, find your people, is you could join a section. Because some people aren't ready to take the leap and find a group or to start a group or to even join a volunteer team, but they're showing up. And so find a section, sit in the same place every week for 4 weeks and just do your best to introduce yourself to the people around you. And what you will realize is, as human beings, we are creatures of habit. So what you will find is a lot of people also sit in the same seat, in the same section week after week. And that's just a simple way to start driving connection, driving engagement with one another. And again, the institution isn't making those relationships for them, but we're just creating the space and then challenging people. You're already here. And many times you're sitting there with your coffee for 10 minutes before the service starts. Use that as a moment to engage the people around you. And so, I think a church of just about any size could do that. You show up in the same place with other people every week. And yet as Americans, we often are so individual. We just sit there in silence or sit on our phones. And we just encourage people, show up 10 minutes early. And there's some people. They're also sitting there on their phones waiting for the service to start,
And do people do it?
We're finding that people do it. Yeah.
That's cool.
So, not everybody, of course. You're going to have the classic introverts and the people that really do just want to be unseen and unnoticed. And I think, especially in a large church like in our context, it's easier to slip in and slip out and go unnoticed. But I would say you have to want that for that to be the reality, because we're really trying to push this relational engagement. Doug, I'm just curious. the reality of so many church leaders is that they grow discouraged because they feel like they can't like sustainably engage people for long periods of time, because when it's institution focused and we're relying on only the institution to engage people, it's like a never ending cycle, where we just have to keep feeding the beast to keep engaging people. And so maybe what have you noticed in pastors or in church leaders around this idea of engagement, maybe some of the realities of discouragement or just exhaustion around some of it? What are you noticing in that?
Well, I would say the trend out there has been, because for so many years we thought institutionally, and that's kind of all we know as church leaders, is an institutional mindset around it. Then engagement, then the responsibility monkey is on the pastor's back. And so you're always feeling the burden of, we could do more, or this is one of my most hated phrases in an elders meeting: the back door is wide open. People are leaving left and right, because we're not engaging them. And so it can lead to this kind of depressed state. Like, what are we doing anyway? Can we even ever get people to engage? And I hear pastors all the time say, one of the casualties of COVID was volunteer rosters in ministries. And coming out of COVID, it's like everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to talk about COVID anymore. Sorry. We're acknowledging the PTSD and we're trying not to say COVID anymore. Okay.
Yes.
Hold me into account on that. So, that you come back to, listen, my background, before I was a pastor, I was a Chick-fil-A owner operator, pre-cows. So I go way back. When Truett Cathy was still alive. And when I came through, I was an owner operator. I went through training. Truett was still engaged with us, came and talked. So did a guy named Jimmy Collins, who's the president, and guy who hired me is incredible. He's the architect of the whole thing and initial for it to scale. And Truett literally would come to training and talk to us about the importance as an owner operator, not of advertising, not of branding, but of relational connection in your community. And so I remember things like he challenged you to have an outfit you wore that you kind of became known for. So I know you can make fun of me. I'm old. I had suspenders for a long time with my tie, my little Chick-fil-A tie. And I was known as the suspender guy. And he had a mentality of the chicken pastor. Like, you literally should function. And it was and if you've ever been around Chick-fil-A, you remember the Be Our Guest cards that we had that would invite you to a free sandwich that they would pass out. And then you're probably not old enough to remember this, but they sampled chicken in malls. Well, all those were literally gospel strategies that Truett was using in a business environment to drive engagement. Whites of the eye, fight for whites of the eye, being curious, learning people's stories. And if you provide, back to your original question, provide space, like join a section, you don't have to program it or necessarily tell people what else to do. People know how to be people. Now, I know we're in this new era. We may need some, because of all of our screen time, we may need some training around how do you be a good friend and how do you be curious about somebody's story. But it still remains, if pastors want to get back to the basics of blocking and tackling, you have to think about, how do I promote the most relational connection I can, just like Truett did when he built a business.
Yeah, that is so good. I think, you just hit on, if we create the space, we don't have to fill the space with a program, because we've created the space. We've gotten whites of the eyes with people. We are, we're in proximity. We're ready for this kind of relational engagement, this personal engagement with one another. And one of the things that makes me think of is, as church staff members, and I'm speaking for myself, whenever there is space and people are gathered together, I am so tempted to fill it with something.
Yes.
And honestly, I just need to get out of the way. And yes, create the space, and yes, be a supportive presence if needed. But this kind of church mentality or church staff mentality that we have to fill the space, we have to entertain people, we have to provide something, or they won't keep coming back. I think that's kind of an assumption that we've made that I think we really need to test and challenge in ourselves. And that's something we've been kind of experimenting with at Canyon Ridge, is when we make the space, people show up and they are really grateful for what they found, because what they found is other people looking for people. And that is enough. And that has to be enough, you know?
Can you pause just a minute there? Because you've said that on a couple of episodes. Like, what are some pragmatic ways you've seen that happen in non-service events? People showing up and finding their people.
Yeah, one way we really tried to explore this and kind of just experiment with this was we decided we were going to try to start some groups, but we weren't going to start them in the traditional way where we had a bunch of leaders who kind of went out and recruited people from the church. Instead, we just advertised a time and we said, we're going to have a groups connection event. If you're looking for people, show up on our campus this day at this time, and there's going to be other people there looking for people. And so we just kind of assigned some people to just be facilitators. We said, you are not leaders. You are not out here recruiting. You are just here making sure that people can kind of find their way and that they feel, you know, seen and welcomed and all of that. And so we have not nailed this. I just want to say that, but we're getting there. We're learning a lot. We've done 2 of these now where we just literally make space. And what's funny is many church people show up expecting us to give them a group. And we are not going to do that. Instead, we have created space and we have said, there's a bunch of other people looking for people. Even this last time, we just tried saying, if you like running, go stand over there and talk to other people who like running. And what we're trying to do is just get people in proximity, again, together, talking face to face, real conversation, even just a couple simple conversation starters, like you said, Doug, because in an era of screens and technology, we need help talking to each other. We need simple lessons.
We do.
But just offering some prompts and then having people talk. And then at the end of it, it's like, well, there's 8 of you standing around right here who all love running and you all want to follow Jesus and you want to learn more about him. What if the 8 of you sat together every week and did that together and you decide the place rather than saying this person is the leader, but you just take turns. Here's some simple questions, a simple guide to help you. That's just one example. And some people look at us like, you are crazy. What do you mean? There's not like, you're not going to tell me who my group leader is and all that. But it's just a way we're trying to help people just find people rather than do it all for them.
Wow. It sounds risky.
It is.
Because for years, my generation, the ones before me, had a high responsibility sense. And so we were always like, how much control do you give up? And will there be blasphemy or any train wrecks and all that when you release leadership like this? But I do think in our travels, those who are listening, some of you we've worked with your churches over the years or been alongside. What we've seen more and more is if you're under 40, maybe under 35, this is awesome strategy. Like if you're an older generation, you're used to church being way more programmed, where it feels like, as my interactions have happened, and we've done some focus grouping and stuff like that with under 40, it feels like this kind of space to learn how to relate is what's needed in church strategy. And so you may be a bit younger than me. Do you agree or disagree with that? Like, this generation is actually hungry for what you're talking about, creating an environment where there's just space that's not programmed so they can connect.
Absolutely. Yep. We are really trying to experiment with some of this in our young adults too. And so we don't have a legit like young adult program where they come on our campus and meet it weekly. We've kept it at groups that they facilitate. And yeah, I totally get the fear of like, what about blasphemy? What if they don't know what they're talking about? And there's ways to come around that. There's ways to provide coaching and to have, people that are still kind of checking in and providing guidance. But I think we have, in many ways, we've gotten that backwards at times. Like we have taken so much control, again, not with poor motivation, with all the best of motivation, because we want truth to win out and all of that. But yeah, I would say the younger generation, they're just looking for space and time to be together, because they have these kind of manufactured, inauthentic relationships everywhere else they go. It's the digital age. That's their everyday lives. Even a lot of young professionals working from home, sitting on Zoom all day, they're just hungry for these authentic relationships face to face with real people. And so, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Isn't it ironic? Because what we're talking about is not earth-shattering on engagement.
Yeah.
We're talking about, hey, build some good friendships, follow Jesus, do what he says together, and do it again and again. It's not like we're teaching, this is not rocket science. And it really does underscore how I believe God is just moving in culture right now. Yes, there are awful, awful things happening in our society. But underneath, there just seems to be an incredible hunger for Jesus right now and for connection relationally to authentic vulnerability and all that stuff. And so I'm like, we should not be shocked as church leaders. Jesus fills this in spades. This is the thing. And so it's really hard to have the discipline to not chase silver bullets when church leadership has been designed to do that for years. Some of my favorite stories right now, my friend Glenn leads a church up in Elkhart, Indiana, which I didn't know this. Erin, do you know what Elkhart, Indiana is known for?
I have no idea, Doug.
And I wonder if any of our listeners do who do not live in Indiana. Elkhart is the motorhome capital of the world. Most motorhomes in the USA are made around or touch Elkhart, Indiana in some way. Did not know that before I went there. Okay, back to Glenn. My friend Glenn leads a church there, Adamsville Road Church of God, that has been doing some of this very relational, how do we engage people, very small church, maybe 70, 75 people coming out of the word we're not allowed to mention anymore. Yeah. And
in 2020, yes.
Yes. That church is exploding. It's more than doubled in attendance. Their baptism, all the lag metrics are off the chart. But it's not because Glenn put a flashy new LED screen up on his stage. It's because he got his people back to this idea of engagement starts with relationships. And how do we facilitate and foster relationships in the modern church going forward and get this programmatic thinking that many of us minimized more and in our heads about how we do it. So
yeah, I think it's just important. One of the ways we think about it at Canyon Ridge is how does someone that shows up at our church, how do they encounter a real person at every place that they try to go? And so if they say they sign up for, they want to serve, how do they encounter a real person, not just an automated funnel, but a real person? How, if they sign up for baptism, how do they encounter a real person who asks them their story, who asks them to describe the journey that Jesus has had them on? And when they come to our new person class, how do they encounter a real person who shows up asking them powerful questions and just sitting with them in curiosity? Just every environment that someone comes, if you think just how do you do this practically? Well, we had to ask the question, are we relying on only email funnels, or are we equipping with real people everywhere? Sometimes just calling to check in and say, how you doing? What could we be doing differently? How could we be, more aware of your experience here? And so I just think, how do you go back again? It feels a little old school, like you said, like calling campaigns and things like that. How do we get back to real people talking to real people? Doug, we've talked a lot just about this idea of personal relational engagement in our churches. And how do we get back to some of the basics of getting real people with real people? I just wonder, you were a church leader and you work with church leaders all the time. What are the things that happen at church that we as leaders hope don't stay at church? Like if you had to answer that for the people that that kind of go to church but aren't super involved, what are the things that happen in a church setting that when someone leaves that activity that you hope for them or that you would desire for them, that it kind of makes its way into their week?
Well, I think I would first off define church because this will be confusing to some of our listeners, not simply just by a church service, but the whole experiences, the environments we're in church, like groups or Sunday school classes, serving, giving my money and time. This is going to be maybe a weird answer, but I would hope all those experiences are helping me die daily more to self, that Jesus is literally transforming my heart through whatever it is, a weekend service and the teaching and the challenge to action, the server that I asked, hey, we pray, can you pray with us? Can I pray for anything for you? And they break down in tears, to, giving of my money. But to remember, we are called, this is an anti kind of modern thought that Jesus, maybe it's forever, that Jesus has given us, and that he is actually calling us not to be codependent, but to die to self more and more each day, allowing him to transform our heart. And when we allow that to happen and go through the pain, because there's pain there, then the adventure of the journey and the great good that can be done in the world is off the charts. So my hope is that people leave church dying to self more.
Yeah, that's good.
Happy thought, right?
Yeah, right. I think of a guy in our church, just as we talk about people doing something. We've talked about this in other episodes, like doing something with what they've heard, taking the good that they've received in this kind of in personal engagement and like using that as a catalyst into the places that they live, work, and play. And so I just think of a guy named Joe who kind of came on the radar at Canyon Ridge a couple years ago. And him and his wife had just kind of started attending, weren't really doing anything. They were just in and out the doors, and Joe they started coming earlier, on Sundays and just started mingling and chatting with people more and more. And long story short, I will just say this personal engagement, like real people just sitting down with Joe and his wife and getting curious, changed the trajectory of their life. Neither of them had been baptized. They both grew up in different faiths. Joe had been in this terrible, terrible accident several years ago at work, and had experienced burns over most of his body. And just real people getting to know Joe and his wife changed everything. And so they encountered real people, in kind of our info area. They went to our Discover Canyon Ridge class and encountered real people. Well, so just so happens that their table host, the person that was just kind of facilitating the conversation for them, ended up becoming one of Joe's very best friends. And when Joe showed up here, he said, I have no one. I have no friends. I have no people. You guys always talk about find your people. I don't have people. And so now we see Joe being this guy who is the biggest advocate for personal engagement and personal relationship. And he's the guy that's out there now, like helping other people find people. He's the guy at our Groups Connection event that I already talked about out there, like helping facilitate, helping people find people. And all it took was real people sitting with him, listening to him, and asking really powerful questions about what his next step might be. And so I just say that to say it works when we are willing to take the time. And it's not fast. Relationships and personal conversation are not the fast way, but they I really believe are the way forward for the church. Thanks everybody for jumping in with us for this episode, and we look forward to chatting with you again.